You are not addicted to short videos. Let's get that out of the way right now. Because here is what addiction actually looks like. You open the app, the first video hits, you feel something. Pleasure, surprise, delight. But that is not what is happening to you anymore. What is happening to you is different. You open the app, the first video plays, then the second, then the 15th, and you feel almost nothing. Not pleasure, not delight, just a faint background hum of almost stimulation that is never quite enough. You keep scrolling not because it feels good, but because stopping feels worse. That is not addiction. That is something the neuroscience community has a very specific name for. And it is significantly more interesting than addiction, and significantly harder to fix. And the people who built the apps you use every day are counting on you never finding out what it is. The word is tolerance. And what is happening inside your brain when short videos stop working is one of the most well-documented and least discussed phenomena in modern neuroscience. It is the same process that makes a drug user need more of the substance to feel the same effect. And it is happening to your dopamine system. Right now, quietly, every time you open the app. Start with how dopamine actually works. Not the version you have heard, not the reward chemical, the pleasure chemical, the feel-good neurotransmitter. That version is wrong, or at least radically incomplete. Neuroscientist Kent Berridge at the University of Michigan spent decades running experiments that dismantled the popular understanding of dopamine entirely. What he found is that dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure. It is the chemical of wanting, of anticipation, of the drive towards something before you have it. The actual experience of pleasure, the liking, is processed by a separate system, using different chemicals entirely, primarily endogenous opioids. This distinction is everything, because it means your dopamine system is not activated by getting the reward. It is activated by the anticipation of the reward. The moment before the next video loads, the fraction of a second between the swipe and the content appearing. That gap, tiny, almost imperceptible, is where dopamine fires. And short-form content has been engineered with extraordinary precision to maximize the frequency of that gap. More swipes per minute means more anticipation cycles per minute, means more dopamine pulses per minute than any entertainment format in human history. This is what tolerance means at a neurological level. When the dopamine system is stimulated repeatedly at high frequency, the brain does not simply continue producing the same response. It recalibrates, it downregulates, it reduces the number of dopamine receptors available. It reduces the sensitivity of the receptors that remain. It effectively turns down the volume on its own pleasure system to compensate for the noise. The brain is trying to maintain equilibrium. And the result for you is that the same input, the same swipe, the same video, the same format, produces less and less of a felt response over time. This is not metaphorical. This is measurable. Neuroscientist Anna Lembke, director of the Stanford Addiction Medicine Dual Diagnosis Clinic and author of Dopamine Nation, has written extensively about what she calls the pleasure-pain balance. The brain, she argues, maintains a tightly regulated equilibrium between pleasure and pain. Every time you stimulate the pleasure side of the scale, the brain automatically tilts toward pain to compensate. This is why you feel slightly worse after a scrolling session than you did before it. Not because something bad happened, because the brain overcorrected. The pendulum swung toward pain to balance the pleasure you just consumed. And the more frequently you stimulate, the more aggressively the brain corrects. Over time, the baseline shifts. What used to feel like pleasure now feels like neutral. What used to feel like neutral now feels like discomfort. And the only way to return to neutral, not to pleasure, just to neutral, is to consume more. To swipe again. To open the app again. Not because it will feel good, because not opening it will feel bad. This is the trap that most people never see from the inside. And here is where the short-form format creates a specific and novel problem that longer content does not. The speed of the format means the dopamine anticipation cycle runs at a frequency the brain was never designed to process. A 60-minute documentary might produce one or two meaningful anticipation peaks: the opening hook, the central reveal, the resolution. A 60-minute scrolling session might produce several hundred peaks. Each swipe is a new anticipation cycle. Each load screen is a new dopamine pulse. The brain is not just being stimulated, it is being hammered. at a rate and consistency that recalibrates its baseline faster than almost any other behavioral input available in modern life. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying what he called flow, the state of deep absorption in a task that is just challenging enough to be engaging. His research found that flow is the state in which humans report the highest levels of subjective well-being, not passive consumption, not entertainment, active engagement with something that requires skill, attention, and effort just at the edge of capability. The problem is that flow requires a brain capable of sustained attention, a brain that can resist the pull of easier stimulation long enough to enter the deeper state, and a brain that has been recalibrated by thousands of hours of high-frequency dopamine cycling is a brain that finds sustained attention increasingly difficult. Not because willpower has failed, because the neurological threshold for what counts as sufficient stimulation has been permanently raised. This is what researchers mean when they talk about rewiring. Not that new neural pathways are being created, though that is also happening, but that existing pathways are being recalibrated. The sensitivity of the system is being adjusted, and the adjustment is cumulative. Every session raises the threshold slightly. Every hour of high-frequency stimulation makes the lower-frequency stimulation of reading, conversation, nature, sustained creative work feel less rewarding by comparison. Not because those things have changed, because your brain's ability to be rewarded by them has. The question you are probably asking right now is the right question. Can this be reversed? The answer is yes, but it requires something that the modern environment makes extraordinarily difficult. Abstinence. Not moderation, not cutting back. Actual abstinence from the high-frequency stimulation long enough for the brain's receptor density to recover. Lemke's clinical work suggests that meaningful recovery of dopamine sensitivity typically requires approximately 4 weeks of abstinence from the specific stimulus. 4 weeks in which the brain is allowed to return to its natural equilibrium. 4 weeks during which the low-level discomfort of not scrolling gradually diminishes as the baseline recalibrates downward. During those 4 weeks, something else happens. The lower stimulation experiences, the conversation, the walk, the book, the meal eaten without a screen, begin to register again. Not dramatically, not immediately, but gradually, as the threshold drops, the brain begins to find reward in the places it used to find it. The world does not become more interesting. Your brain becomes more capable of being interested. This is not a moral argument against short videos. It is a neurological description of what sustained high-frequency dopamine stimulation does to a brain's capacity for pleasure over time. The format is not evil. The engineers who designed it were not malicious. They were optimizing for engagement, and they succeeded. So completely that they created a product capable of making almost everything else feel boring by comparison. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote 2,000 years ago about what he called the disease of the soul, the restless inability to be satisfied by anything, the constant seeking of novelty. The way that pleasure pursued too aggressively eventually destroys the capacity for pleasure itself. He was describing wealthy Romans with too much leisure and too much entertainment. He had no concept of an algorithm, no concept of a feed, no concept of a device that could deliver 10,000 pieces of novel content in a single afternoon. But he understood the mechanism. You pursue pleasure. Pleasure recedes. You pursue it harder. It recedes further. And somewhere along the way, you stop pursuing pleasure at all and start simply trying to outrun the discomfort of its absence. That is where you are when shorts no longer excite you. Not at the beginning of a problem, at the point where the problem has already been running long enough to change the baseline. The good news is that the baseline can change again, in the other direction. But it requires something the app was specifically designed to prevent you from doing. Putting it down and leaving it down, long enough for your brain to remember what it felt like before the volume was turned up this high. There are things in your life right now that deserve your full attention and are not getting it. A person you love who would be changed by an uninterrupted hour with you. A skill you meant to build that is still waiting. A place near where you live that you have never actually looked at properly. A thought you have been having for months that you have never followed all the way to the end because something always interrupted it. These things are not competing with short videos. One is stimulation, the other is life. You already know what that felt like. You just need the quiet long enough to hear it again.